In this video, I'm going to explain subtraction. Now, we've always thought about subtraction as taking something away. And what we usually mean by that is the first number, the number that comes before the subtraction sign, means what we start with, and the number after the subtraction sign tells us what to take away, or how many to take away. So if I start with 9, and I take away 5, then the answer to the subtraction problem, or the difference we say, is 4. It's what I'm left with. Okay, so if we think back to the video before this one, how do we actually cancel things out? If I had 9 positives to begin with, well, how come what do I have to do to cancel them out? And what we saw last time was that opposites cancel each other. So taking away 5 is kind of like putting 5 negatives here in order to cancel out. Now this idea starts to help come up with a theory of how to do subtraction in a bunch of different cases. If I wanted to solve 9 minus 3 this way, I could picture 9 positives and 3 negatives. And when I cancel out, these 3 positives, by using the 3 negatives, I end up with only 6 positives. Well, what I'm really doing here is instead of just taking away 3, I'm starting with 9, and I'm adding it, I'm combining it with negative 3. And so 9 minus 3 and 9 plus negative 3 mean the same thing. I'm still going to cancel out 3 positives in either case and get positive 6. But this helps us to think about subtraction problems where you're taking away more than you have. Well, what would it mean to do 4 minus 7? Well, just like when I took 3 away, I was able to add 3 negatives to do that. If I want to take 7 away, then I'm going to add 7 negatives to do that. These 7 negatives make all 4 of the positives cancel out, and there's still 3 negatives left over, which means that 4 minus 7 is negative 3. Well, if we wanted to relate this strategy to even more problems, we could say, well, what if you had negative 3 and you took away something? If you took away 5. Well, if I start with 3 negatives, and then I add to it 5 more negatives, because that's what taking away 5 really means. Take away 5 is like adding 5 negatives. Well, then in the end, I just have 3 plus 5 is 8, and they're all negatives. So I have negative 8. This problem looked like I started with negative 3, and then I added to it negative 5. And I got the answer negative 8. And the problem above looked like starting with positive 4 and adding negative 7 to get negative 3. The difference between these two problems is really just that I started with my subtraction problem and I rewrote the subtraction part as addition by the opposite. So I started with negative 3, and then instead of subtracting, I'm adding, but I'm not adding 5 now. Now I have to add negative 5 to do the same thing as subtracting positive 5. So when we think about subtraction, we're thinking of adding the opposite. That subtraction is really just the opposite of addition. Let's see sometimes, let's think about what it would mean to have 3 and to take away something negative, to subtract a negative number? What would it mean to do 3 minus negative 4? To think about what this would mean, I'm going to use our idea of subtraction as taking away. And I'm going to think of how could I take away from positive 3 a negative 4? Well, in order to take away negatives, I have to have some negatives. So I'm going to put 4 negatives out here that I could take away. But if I leave the 4 negatives by themselves, then this really means I'm starting with positive 1, because there's 3 pairs that could cancel each other out. And I don't want to start with positive 1. I want to start with positive 3. So in order to do that, I need to make these 4 negatives that I added 0 pairs. Well, because I have 4 negatives and 4 positives that I've added to the picture, these really all cancel each other out. And they mean that I've added a bunch of zeros to my 3 positives. With this picture, though, I can show what it would mean to take away negative 4. Just take away 4 negatives. So what I'm left with now is 3 positives here and 4 positives here, which means I ended up with 7 positive. So 3 minus negative 4 is positive 7. If we think about what actually got drawn in the end, was I started with 3 and I added positive 4 to get 7. So just like the examples above, when we turn subtraction with a positive number into addition with a negative, if we're subtracting a negative number, we can turn that into addition with a positive number. Again, all we're thinking is subtraction is adding the opposite. Negative 9 minus negative 10 would be negative 9 plus positive 10. We don't really need this positive sign, so we can just write it as negative 9 plus 10. And we know how to solve this using our rules for addition. Since the signs are different, we're going to subtract the numbers. Do 10 minus 9 is 1. And take the sign from the bigger number, which is 10. So since this is positive, the answer is positive. Let's do a few more. Negative 8 minus 12. I'm going to start by changing subtraction to addition and adding the opposite. Negative 8 plus negative 12. Since they're both negative now, and I'm adding, I'm just going to add the two numbers. So I'll do 12 plus 8. And 12 plus 8 is 20. And since both numbers are negative, then our answer is negative. Negative 20. What if I had negative 3 minus negative 15? Well, since subtraction is just the opposite of addition, we can do negative 3 plus positive 15. Here I'm adding numbers with different signs, so I'm going to remember that I have to subtract in this case. 15 minus 3 is 12. And now I have to decide if it's positive or negative. And since the bigger number here is positive, the answer is positive. So positive 12 is the answer. Essentially what we've gotten to is a general rule for subtraction. Let's say if you had A minus B. Our idea is that since subtraction is just the opposite of addition, that we could change this into A plus negative B. And what if we had A minus negative B? Well, we could change that into A plus positive B. That whenever we see subtraction, we can rewrite it as addition with the opposite. if we were subtracting a positive number, well, we can rewrite that as adding a negative number. And if we were subtracting a negative number, then we can just write that as adding a positive. Just make sure that you don't change the sign of the first number that you're starting with. When we rewrite subtraction to addition, the only thing that changes is the second number.